This is Gray Matter, where we process the gray areas of culture. I'm Kaitlin Puccio, and today's topic is what is a woman? The Cambridge Dictionary recently updated its definition of man. Previously, it was defined as an adult male human being. Now it includes an alternative definition, an adult who lives and identifies as male, though they may have been said to have a different sex at birth. There are 2 points to note about this new definition. First, the dictionary uses they to refer to a single adult. This is presumably not the non-binary version of they, given that the dictionary is defining the binary man. So this means that the dictionary either decided to use the colloquial they to refer to a single individual, or couldn't figure out whether the correct pronoun to use was he or she, and thus favored using the socially correct they over the grammatically correct singular pronoun. This choice may bring the credibility of the alternative definition into question, because by choosing to eschew the grammatically correct pronoun, it may seem to some readers that the dictionary is prioritizing social activism over English grammar. This concern brings to light the intriguing second point to note about this new definition. By providing the alternative definition, the dictionary is being exclusive in its effort to be inclusive. That is, it's potentially prioritizing social activism at the same time that it is othering transgender individuals. Including transgender men as part of an alternative definition rather than expanding the primary definition of man, is effectively indicating that an adult who lives and identifies as male, though they may have been said to have a different sex at birth, is distinct in some way from an adult male human being. To be fully inclusive, the dictionary maybe should have included the alternative definition as part of the primary definition. And this exemplifies why it has been so difficult to define man and woman in a way that is satisfactory to all. Every new or altered definition is prone to being picked apart in this way because we're conflating social issues with terminological issues. Defining the term woman satisfactorily has proved to be particularly difficult in recent months. In general, we, as a society, have been both broadening and narrowing the definition of woman too broadly and too narrowly. For instance, woman has been replaced with the term person with a uterus in order to avoid calling transgender men who are biological women, women in a women's health context. But not all women have a uterus, not all biological women, and not transgender women who are biological men. Other terms that we have suggested being used are birthing person and person who menstruates, both of which fail to avoid the issues raised by using the term person with a uterus, and both of which have been rejected as degrading to women. So because the spectrum of gender identity, which is man, woman, trans man, non-binary, gender fluid, trans non-binary, etc., which trans non-binary needs definitional clarification itself because it's unclear how one can be trans if one is non-binary, because it seems that it's necessary for a trans individual to have something to transition to and from. So because the spectrum of gender identity is broader than the spectrum of biological gender, male and female, and sometimes intersex, what is the purpose of commandeering the term woman, separating it from its traditional definition, which is based on biological factors, and which leaves the traditional definition without a term, and trying to force feed it with various new definitions that are inclusive enough while being exclusive enough such that certain parties, namely transgender men, are not inappropriately gendered? would it not be more efficient and effective to avoid the confusion over the once settled terms man and woman, which pointed to biology, if we're not considering biology as part of the definition? In other words, why is trans woman an insufficient term where it's more accurate and both inclusive and exclusive enough to accurately communicate the gender identity of individuals? The issue, it seems, with using the term trans woman rather than altering the definition of woman to include those who identify as women is a practical issue, not a terminology issue. If trans woman is used separately from the term woman, it's an indication that trans women are somehow different from women, and the distinction will lead to othering in women's sports and women's prisons, etc. Adding an alternative definition under a primary definition of man or woman in an attempt to be inclusive does not avoid this issue. But the attempts to redefine the term woman have not had a positive impact on the societal acceptance of trans women in women's sports, for example. So continuing to fight over terminology as a means of fighting for whatever rights the trans community delineates as needing to be fought for is going to continue to be ineffective. Rather than focusing on words, we should be focusing on the substance of the argument, because even if the primary definition of woman is changed to include trans women, that doesn't mean that a new term won't be introduced that means biological woman, that will then be used to replace the term woman in women's sports. Language is unrestrictedly malleable over time. Human rights are less malleable. So if trans women believe that they have a right to compete on women's sports teams and use women's locker rooms, etc., the argument shouldn't be that they have the right to do so because they are women, because that argument is based on flimsy and ever-changing terminology. The argument needs to show that they have such a right intrinsically. Is it possible to argue this in the same way that biological women would be able to? Some would argue that this is not possible because of the biological differences between men and women. If we reject this biological argument, the counter-argument put forth cannot be primarily focused on the pliable terms we use to communicate about transgender individuals. How we talk about something doesn't change the real-world facts. It can only change the perception of a number of individuals insufficient to bring about lasting societal change. If one side wants to present an argument about how the facts the other side relies upon are incorrect, the former needs to use reliable facts to present that argument and not rely on linguistic acrobatics.